So thank you, John, for the introduction. My name's Becci Whitton. I manage the policy team at OPC in Wellington. So transparency reporting is the idea of private companies publicly reporting about the number of requests for their customers' information that they've received from government agencies. So largely law enforcement, but in New Zealand there are a huge range of government agencies with information gathering powers. Now, transparency reporting has its genesis overseas, largely in the context of concern about government surveillance. In New Zealand there's only a couple of companies doing transparency reporting off their own bat, most notably TradeMe. And we think this is it's a great initiative. We think transparency reporting is really good for privacy because it helps people to understand the data landscape. It helps them to understand what is happening with the personal information that companies hold about them. And also, we think it's really important to provide real information, to help reality check some of the myths or concerns that people have about government surveillance or excessive use of government information gathering powers. But as I said, there's very little transparency reporting actually happening in this country. And that's what we wanted to try and encourage, is more companies to do their own transparency reporting. And we asked ourselves, as the regulatory body in New Zealand, is there any role that we can play in helping to promote transparency reporting? And we noticed that some of the barriers companies were facing to taking up transparency reporting was real first mover disadvantage. So if you're the first in your sector, if you're the first bank to come out and say, I give the personal information about thousands of my customers to the police every year, you don't want to be the first one in that position. So what we did was decided to run a trial of us reporting the information in an anonymous way so that companies could collect this data, report it to us, and then we'd publish it and provide some commentary around that. So we've done 2 trials now, one in the second half of last year and one at the beginning of this year. We had 10 companies participate last year and then 8 this year. What we did was we provided them with a spreadsheet. It was a very simple methodology where we asked them to collect information over a 3-month period about the requests that they got from government agencies for information about their customers, to record what agency it came from, what the request was for, so was it for the information of one customer or a huge number of customers, and what the legal basis for the request was. So was it under a warrant, was it under some other statutory provision, or was it just a request? So behind me you can see the results from the trial this year, and I'm presenting these with a caveat that this conference arrived before I actually managed to get the published report out of the door. So these numbers are not likely to change, but if you bear that in mind, that we haven't had a chance to actually publish these yet. These results are very similar to what we found last year. So last year we had a slightly larger sample, and we found over 3 months 12,000 requests from government agencies to companies, almost all of which were complied with. Now, our sample is obviously quite small. It's not particularly representative. We did have companies from different sectors, such as financial services, transport, retail, but obviously by no means a representative sample. But even with that caveat, extrapolating out from these numbers really does reveal that government agencies are collecting a huge amount of personal information from private companies for very legitimate purposes. I mean, one of the most interesting things that struck me when we first started this work was sitting down with a telco, and I was talking to the guy who manages the team that responds to the police, particularly about requests for personal information. And we were talking about bulk requests, so sort of when the police will ring up and say, give me the names and numbers of all the cell phones that pass through this tower in this period of time, which on the one hand seems outrageous. It seems like the police are just on some crazy fishing expedition. But actually when we dug into it, we found that most of these are missing persons or hit and runs, or situations where there is urgency and they need to know everyone who is in that area. But the person I was speaking to made what I think was one of the most interesting comments in this work, was that he said, he had not been running this team very long, and he said when he took over the job, he couldn't believe the quantity of requests. And he said, I just came to this company to sell phones. How did I become like a vital part of the law enforcement apparatus? And that's really, to me, that really illustrates why transparency reporting is so important and so interesting, because government agencies really have come to rely on these data sets as a key part of how they do their work, of how they investigate crime, how they investigate fraud. And the relationship between government and companies, this is something that's grown very quickly, and it's continuing to change. So in terms of from a research perspective, I wanted to touch on some of the challenges we faced, and obviously the key one was getting participants. So, 10 companies last year, 8 companies this year. Sorry, is that going fuzzy? Can you still hear me okay? Yeah, cool. Thank you, good, reassuring. Obviously, we would have liked a much larger sample. We reached out to really everyone we could think of, but it was we were only a small office with not a lot of resource dedicated to this project, and we found it surprisingly labour intensive to get people on board. We found a lot of caution, a lot of risk aversion about, we've got a very sensitive relationship with the police, with MSD, with IRD, we don't want to rock the boat. Obviously first mover disadvantage. Interestingly, we companies who were worried about what their competitors were doing, we said, well, we could facilitate getting you together, and they said, oh no, because we can't be seen to collude, so we really can't be in the room having discussions with our competitors. And then also we struggled to keep people interested, so we'd have a sit-down meeting with the Chief Legal Counsel and give them the sell and get them on board, but then they'd have to go and convince the operational teams to actually gather the data. And what we found made the biggest difference was actually whether companies had a centralised point for receiving these requests, or whether they just came in to whatever branch the local cop had happened to call. Because in that situation, companies were actually facing quite high costs to collate this information. But nonetheless, we did get enough participants to, I think, still collect some interesting data. And even the companies who declined to participate, we did get quite a good level of interest. Several companies saying, they'd like to see where this goes and, keep us informed, and we're sort of very much watching this space. And actually a number of companies who were very interested in transparency reporting and saw huge value in it, who but declined to participate because they thought the burden of doing it and the cost should lie on the government agencies. Why should they know just as well as we how many requests have been made? So government do it. To which I say, well, it's a bit easier to talk you into something than the police. So, so where to next? We're still considering whether to run another trial, but we certainly are following up with our participants and the other companies who we reached out to, because we did make a number of contacts who are interested in producing their own transparency reports, but just need a bit of a nudge. So I have been, over the last few weeks, quietly trying to put companies in touch with like Trade Me, who are already doing this, and sharing with them examples of what's already working and what's being done well. And we also are intending next year to do some work on guidance for companies and also for law enforcement agencies to help people understand, particularly companies, their responsibilities when they're approached with a request for information. So if you're approached with a request for information and the police or whoever it is has a warrant or a production order, that's very straightforward. Or they're exercising a power that they have under the Social Development Act, or any number of the other 24 pieces of legislation that have some form of information gathering power in them. But a lot of these requests were just requests, and often we found that particularly police were framing these requests as being under the Privacy Act, particularly Principle 11E, which is the exception that says, as a holder of information, you may not disclose unless disclosure is necessary for the maintenance of the law. So we found a lot, particularly because the kind of local police stations were ringing up and saying, well, under Principle 11E, I demand, you have to give it to me. But it doesn't work like that. That exception is an exception. It's not a power for the police. So we're hoping to put guidance out in the new year for companies to help them understand if you receive a request like that, you need to be satisfied that the release of the information is actually necessary. So there's an obligation on the police or whoever the requester is to inform you about why they need it, and also an obligation on you to ask that question and to document your reasoning. So that's all from me.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Obviously, it's a great initiative from your office. I'm wondering whether you've got any empirical or anecdotal evidence of better behaviour by the requesters because there's transparency by these agencies. So in other words, are they more modest in their requests than they might have been 3, 4, 5 years ago?
Yes.
You've seen some.
Definitely. And particularly companies who had centralised points, so a single point of contact for receiving the requests, and thus able to, develop considerable sort of knowledge in the staff working in that area, even if they weren't actually doing transparency reporting, but if they had clear organisational processes for, and the banks I think particularly are quite good at this, so if you get this kind of question, we will not release information until we're satisfied of these points. And that was actually something that companies really, in the feedback we got, they really wanted help with was, what policies and procedures do others have? What should we be doing so that we're, our legal liability is covered off? But yeah, definitely the more they'd thought about it, the better the processes were.
I had a sort of similar question because your this enterprise reveals as much about the people, the agencies who are asking as it does about the companies who were your participants. And I just wondered whether you had any communication with those agencies and whether they expressed views about transparency reporting.
Yes, we absolutely did. So we met with all of them before we did the first pilot last year. Only the strongest concern was from the police from an operational perspective. So they were worried that if companies were, producing information in real time, that would give clues as to what was being investigated. And so the mitigations for that risk are, publishing once a year, so that there's a time delay, and aggregating data. And yeah, we were, that was really good feedback to get from the police. We certainly didn't want to do anything that would jeopardise a real operation. How am I going for time? Good? Thank you very much. Oh, do we have time for one more?
We'll go straight to, we'll come back to questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Vanya.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Vanya Vida. I'm a policy advisor for Codes and International at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. Before I start my presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our 4 Privacy Good Research 2015 recipients to come out here and present their research results to all of us. I've really enjoyed the first half of the day. It doesn't mean that I'm not enjoying this, but I hope it lives up to the standards that they've created for all of us. So thank you so much for all the 4 of you to come here. Now, moving on to my presentation, which is on, as you can see, spot checks on credit reporters. This idea of conducting a spot check was conceived by my manager, Blair Stewart. And when I was interning with the office back in 2013, he had put this project out for the students who were interning at the office to provide some research. And when I came back to the office to work with them full time, which was in 2014, we picked up on this research. And so what I'm trying to say is it was his idea, and my role in this whole project was to implement and execute it. So thank you so much, Blair, for the opportunity. Now, the spot check was conducted by a mystery shopper type technique. What that is it's a mystery shopper or secret shopper, or in Blair's language, mystery consumer, is a research technique used widely by retailers, market research organizations, regulators to measure quality, service standards, or test compliance. So what we did was we looked at a few companies and we tested them against a criteria, and the criteria was based on whether they could perform, live up to our expectations, had any prior work experience in conducting a mystery shopping exercise, and whether they did it for any other government agency. So we've shortlisted one company and we outsourced it to them. They hired around 30 individuals who were willing to participate in this mystery shopping exercise. So what those 30 people were told to do was, we created this information sheet for them, and we told them, okay, under the Credit Reporting Privacy Code, an individual, every individual has a right to go to these 3 national consumer credit reporting companies and request their free credit report. So basically, we were trying to test how the 3 credit reporters in New Zealand were meeting their access requirements under the code. We also tried to test for how they were charging. Under the code, clause 7 of the code allows credit reporters to charge up to $10 to provide a credit report within 5 working days. So it's up to the individual. So moving on, the spot check was conducted last year. We started it in June 2015 and we finished it in October 2015. There were a lot of problems that we experienced. One, people were not aware of the Credit Reporting Privacy Code. They needed a lot of education. So the information sheet that we presented and provided the contractor with to share with the individuals needed some more work. They needed some more guidance, but we got there at the end. And so around 30 people participated in it. We tried to get an age group of starting from 18 to 65. The aim was to get credit active adults in New Zealand, and we never targeted any region within the country. It was just across the board. And so moving on. Why we did this? We did this, like I've mentioned briefly, to get a better picture of how the 3 national consumer credit reporters met their access requirements under the code. We used this innovative tool because John over here is very, very encouraging of us as the OPC staff to use innovative tools to do our work. So if he wouldn't have really agreed to it, we wouldn't have really gone ahead with this. So thank you so much, John. So this innovative tool helped us to gain a snapshot of compliance rather than solely relying on complaints. As you all know, or you might not know, our office gets the major contribution of our work is through complaints. We investigate privacy complaints, and we wanted to use a different tool to get a real picture of how the credit reporting industry met their access requirements. So this was the first pilot that we did last year, and primary focus again was to just test the access requirements, how the credit reporters met. Our aim was, the driving force was to promote, good practice amongst credit reporters. I must mention here that all the 3 national credit reporters were very forthcoming of this idea. We did not get a pushback. When we met with them, when we told them this is what we were doing up till now, and we shared a report with them, a draft report, they were they were not extremely happy, but they were not, dismissive of the idea. Yeah. So the exercise was not undertaken to initiate direct enforcement. We thought of this earlier on again. Again, I would say we thought of it. It was more of Blair pushing in that direction. He encouraged us to look of a draft ethical policy, and what the ethical policy did was it identified issues that would surface because of using this mystery shopping technique. So we've got an ethical policy in place, and the issues that it identified was, what happens if the contractor breaches the privacy of the staff or otherwise who acted unethically. What we did this was, to address this was, we had a non-disclosure agreement required with the contractor, and we told the people who were participating in this exercise to be tight-lipped about this whole process. Now, what happened if individuals concerned who were participating in this exercise released their information to the contractor? So what we did to address this ethical issue was we asked the individuals participating in this exercise to redact their personal information from credit reports and send it to us and not the contractor. So that was one way to tackle it, and we had clearly mentioned in the ethical policy, whatever would be the outcome of this, we were not going to initiate any direct enforcement. It might have been a basis for us to start some more research into the direction that would have surfaced at the time, but luckily nothing happened of that nature. Moving on, and thank you so much, Linda, for moving my slides. So the findings of the pilot, it was good to know what exactly credit reporters are doing when it comes down to meeting their access requirements. The technique was useful to get an insight. We did publish the report, which is available on our website. There are 2 reports looking something like this. One is talking about the results of the report. The other is sets out the methodology of the exercise we used. Feel free to go onto the website. The link is directly mentioned in my slide here. We did also the findings revealed, the findings were not only about access and charging, but we also got some side benefits. One was we got to know that one credit reporter was not putting a written transcript. Under the privacy code, you're required to have a transcript to define a codified diagram if you're supplying that in your information. So we got to know about that. We would have not got to know until and unless we did this exercise. So they came on board and they said, okay, very good. We've identified this flaw. We were already going to start rolling it out in our credit reports, so they did that. That was one benefit that we got from this whole exercise, additional benefit. The other one was we got to know that one credit reporter was actually reporting on a credit field, that credit information type that they were not required or allowed to do under the credit code. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for paying attention. And any questions?